2.
Welcome back to the Best of Investing. When we cut to the first commercial break, we asked this first trivia question. The music group Starship used to be Jefferson Starship, but what was their name before Jefferson Starship? Now, Phil, I think I saw your hand raised. What's the answer to that?
Jefferson Airplane.
Jefferson Airplane, that is correct. The first 3 callers to 888-912-1190 won a free 3-day, 2-night stay. We are in the studio with Phil Diamond, who is an expert in mediation and arbitration. And we're going to get into what's the difference between the two. I just want to make a quick comment. I was an expert witness in a securities case, investment securities, and it was an arbitration. So it was just like a little mini courtroom in a conference room where you had both parties there, and I was an expert for just one of the parties. But in mediation, because I've been in that too, it's separate, isn't it? Eventually coming back together?
Well, typically, and we'll talk a bit more about how the mediation process works, the parties are going to be together at some point during the mediation process. Yeah. Sometimes, and we'll talk about how I do it, the parties are also separate, both before and after.
And that's not just so they don't kill each other, it's
well, sometimes it is, actually. In family disputes, I've seen that happen, and we can talk a bit about that as well.
So Phil, how does the mediation process work?
Sure, so it begins as a general rule with the parties jointly agreeing upon who the mediator is going to be, and this is of course after they've decided that they're going to go through mediation. The mediator then typically speaks with the parties before the actual mediation itself, either directly or through their lawyers if they're represented by lawyers. And the purpose of that pre-mediation work is to make sure that everything is teed up, if you will, so that the parties come completely prepared to get the matter resolved when they're actually together in mediation. Typically, the parties will exchange what we call mediation briefs in advance of the mediation. They'll give them to each other and to the mediator. Those briefs tell each other and the mediator what the case is all about and why each side thinks that its side should prevail. So then, now fast forward to the mediation itself. Now, different mediators hold them differently. I'll talk with you about how I do mediations. I always make it a rule to talk with each side separately for a little bit before I bring the parties together. It's helpful for me to get to know them. It's helpful for them to get to know me. Helpful for me to be able to find out what is really motivating them and what their needs and interests are that are behind the dispute. It also gives me an opportunity to assist them for the next part, which is the joint session, to give them the benefit of my thoughts as to what is important for them to cover during that joint session and what may be important, to the contrary, to not cover. If there are hot button issues, for example, that may set the other side off and stop the other side from actually listening.
Well, yeah, because you're trying not to get personal in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, keep that away. Let me ask you a quick question on this. Because we're talking about the difference between arbitration, which is a little more binding, than mediation, which may or may not be binding. Do you find that clients act differently in arbitration versus mediation? Is there something psychologically going on with them where they know, hey, arbitration, this is like a court setting versus mediation, we might come to a conclusion, we might not?
Well, not really, and I say that because they know going in which setting that they're in, and if they're in arbitration, they know they're going to trial. And the mindset is, we're not here to negotiate, we're here to convince the arbitrator that we should win. Contrast that with the mediation setting, where they are there not so much to convince me as the mediator of anything, but to convince the other side as to the strength of their position.
So do you find them being different?
Very.
Okay, so there is a difference in their attitude.
So if I'm trying to resolve a dispute that I have with someone, and would I want to look for a mediator that's an expert in the field that we're working in, or is it more of an art than a science?
That's a great question, and that question is asked frequently, and is often the topic of discussions among mediators.
What do you know about construction defects?
Exactly. I like to answer it this way. I think that the most important skill set that a mediator brings to the table is the ability, number one, to be able to work with people, to be able to engage people in a conversation and in a dialogue in a way that they can have an open mind as to not only their point of view, but the point of view of others. Secondly, the skill set that I think the mediator brings to the table is the ability to structure a conversation in a non-confrontational way so that the parties can get past the underlying issues.
Well, and they have to really feel that you are really independent.
Absolutely.
Even if you, I mean, I'm sure that in some mediations you may be looking and going, holy smokes, it's clearly toward one side versus another, but you have to really keep it
Or one side's more reasonable than the other.
Yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely. The key to mediation is for the parties to have trust in the mediator to guide this process and to help guide them through this dispute toward resolution. Neutrality is absolutely key to that. The other issue that you raise is whether it's helpful for the mediator to have some substantive background in the area that is in dispute. And I would say that it certainly helps. It's not critical in all areas, but what is critical is if a mediator is mediating a dispute that he or she doesn't have substantive background in, that he or she be a quick study to be able to understand.
That's a good point, because I could see where it's maybe not quite as important, because if you go to trial, what are the odds that the judge is really going to know a lot about
the jury for that matter.
Or the jury, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not going to get all contracts.
Peers, really?
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly, which brings us to the question of why is it that people should even consider in mediation resolving their disputes? And one of the things that a mediator can help the parties to understand is the point you just made, Mark, which is that there are no certain outcomes in trial.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen in the course of a lawsuit all along the way, up to and including the time when the jury comes back with a verdict that can never be predictable.
Yeah.
So one of the advantages to mediation is a certain outcome, and a certain outcome now, as opposed to waiting a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years for an outcome that is totally unpredictable.
Well, not only time, but the expense of the
It's
trial.
only the attorneys that make out in this.
And no offense, Phil, but...
None taken.
Yeah. Okay.
So what are we talking about in terms of cost now, since we're talking about the money? I mean, mediation obviously is got to be a much more cost-effective, time-effective.
Sure, well, plus they split the cost, right?
Absolutely. So let's talk for a minute about what some of the advantages of mediation are, and in that context, we're comparing it with the alternative, which is a full-blown lawsuit, which starts with the filing of a complaint, and from that period on, going down through what we call the pleadings, and then through discovery, the depositions, the interrogatories, the request for production, the things that can go on for years, and then finally through the actual trial itself.
This is a great show, because I know a lot of our listeners out there are either have gone through lawsuits or are contemplating lawsuits on either being the plaintiff or the
if you're an
defendant.
entrepreneur or a real estate investor, you've likely been served more than once or twice.
Exactly.
So here are some advantages of this process. Number one, as we've already discussed, it's quick. You can have a mediation scheduled at any time when the parties are ready to do it. Secondly, it's an informal process. It's typically done in a private office. There are no formal oaths given by anybody. The parties determine themselves when it happens, how long it lasts, when there will be breaks, for example, whether there will be follow-up sessions, and if so, when. We talked about the fact that relative to litigation, it is extremely inexpensive. It's a fraction of the cost of a full-blown lawsuit.
Can you give us rough number? I know each mediator charges a different amount. Can you give any kind of...
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that, Edward, because every case is different.
Okay, somewhere between $2 and $2 million. Okay, that's it. All right, that's a wide
Are there
range.
hourly rates that one could expect that would be within a normal range in mediation?
Sure, and I'm just going to throw this out as a guess. I haven't looked at what would be typical recently, but I'm going to guess anywhere between $350 to $600 an hour, give or take.
Yeah, I was thinking about $500 an hour.
Yeah,
somewhere in that range for the mediator, and that's typically split by the parties. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be only a two-party mediation. Many mediations involve far more than just two parties.
Sure, because you might have an insurance company and for that example. Okay, we are going to cut to our second commercial break. We are in the studio with Phil Diamond, an attorney who specializes in mediation. It's been a great show. We're going to continue on with this. But here is our second trivia question. Matt Damon appeared in the remake of the movie True Grit, but who played his part in the original True Grit opposite John Wayne? Hint, He was a country singer. The first 3 callers with the correct answer win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Their website, again, is lighthouse4fun.com. Check them out. Call 1-888-912-1190. That's our new phone number, 888-912-1190, to answer this question. Matt Damon appeared in the remake of the movie True Grit, but who played his part in the original True Grit movie opposite John Wayne? And here's a hint. He was a country singer. 888-912-1190. Make sure to include your name, address, and phone number, and we will be right back.